Glad you're with us once again. It has been almost 24 hours of Kassie McClung. So good to see you again.
Here we are again. Good to see you.
Yeah,
I'm really loving our evening chats, Scott.
It's great. Your program last night was wonderful, and the
Thank you.
Education Watch. And once again, the topics that give us that topic one more time.
We're talking on Tuesday nights at 7 p.m. about how districts can kind of effectively spend ESSER money, which was pandemic-related federal money meant to kind of swoop in and rescue schools and fund, programs to address unfinished learning, programs to address social and emotional issues with students right now, K-12, it's for K-12 schools. And so there's a lot that goes into spending that $1.5 billion that the state's been awarded. And so it's been a really interesting discussion. Last night was special. There was a little bit of emotion because you're seeing these administrators, people in education tend to be in for heart reasons, for passion reasons. And, I think seeing kids struggle in very real ways and struggle to learn and struggle to be well and be social is, I think it's becoming it's challenging for adults in these fields to continue to see students this way. And they're figuring out cool solutions, which we talked about last night.
There is a lot of money floating around. We'll be talking about that in the upcoming weeks.
Yeah.
We have some great guests. Why don't you go ahead and tease our guests so people will know and hang around. We're going to get to Ryan Welton here in just a moment because we're going to talk a little OU football. Go figure. But we have some really in-depth conversations tonight about some topics that really, really matter, Augusta. And you've got two great guests.
Yeah. So guests this evening, we have Read Frontier's Kassie McClung, who's a health reporter with that outlet. And she did a really great piece, a really unique piece of original reporting on a solution that Black families are turning to in Oklahoma as there's been a historic, and this is not new, but there are historic rates of poor health outcomes and maternity outcomes for Black women. So there's an interesting local solution, doulas. And so she goes into this experience of a family, getting to know their doula and this as kind of a solution to poor birth outcomes for Black women in the state. And then we have, in light of another execution this week, Bigler Stouffer is set to be executed tomorrow at 10 a.m. So tonight we have the executive director of the ACLU of Oklahoma, Tamya Cox-Toure, and she coached me on her name before this, and I know I just botched it again.
I've got by the way, I know Tamya. I've got the last one. It's a Toure. Can I get a thumbs up on that, Tamya? Okay, I've got this was because I knew another member of the family.
Toure.
Yeah, so two great guests, by the way. So forgive me for jumping in. Because I knew Opio and his name.
No, thank you. And I was psyching myself out about this, and so then I botched it. But she is going to be offering some insight on where we stand in terms of the civil rights question surrounding Oklahoma's death penalty and lethal injection process. And so I'm really looking forward to hearing Tamaya's comments about that a little bit later in the show.
It's going to be great. And tonight microphones are working. And Monday night, by the way, Candace and I were at Mountain Vista down at, you go to beaversbendvacations.com. If you have, we have to do a show, Augusta, about what's happening in Broken Bow and Ochetown and all these places in Southeast Oklahoma. People this weekend were going, hey, y'all from Oklahoma City, how'd y'all find us? Because the Texans have found us, and they have. And speaking of issues that have grabbed everybody's attention, by the way, we have the master with us tonight. Let's go ahead and bring him in. And there he is.
Wizard. There he is.
He's working the Sonys tonight, by the way.
Right.
Ryan
with the UCLA flag in the background. I'm an OU grad. I'm a Boomer Sooner born, Sooner bred, but I live in a dual household. My wife's family's from LA. My father-in-law, who's deceased, he went to UCLA Law School. So we love us some Sooners. We love the Bruins.
Yeah, and that's UCLA is my favorite team in Southern California. The other one, I don't know who they are.
It's doubly good for me because with Lincoln Riley going to USC, our family has two reasons to root against him. Yeah.
Just say Voldemort.
Right.
So I think it's the easier way just to say Voldemort and be. By the way, I got a note from a friend this week on Your Book Counts. We had some fun with this. And Sonny, a friend of mine, says, "Hey, you did Lord of the Rings opening." I'm like, "No, it's Harry Potter, man." Candace told me I'd blow the whole thing. Couldn't communicate it. But let's get to we don't have Ryan, but just for a few minutes, and we had a semi-serious topic here, which we weren't just talking about Voldemort bolting for Southern California. It was also I saw the new coach show up, and we've always had live shots, but digital has brought a whole different aspect of this. I mean, we have a digital journalist here at Kassie McClung in just a few minutes on this. Digital has changed how this is covered, and this was this story as big as weather?
Almost, and I will tell you,
almost
real-time stats. It depends what kind of weather. If we're talking, a tornado in the metro, no, it's not. It wasn't as big as that in terms of viewership. It's close. It was in the neighborhood. It was bigger than most severe weather that's not producing a tornado. I'll put it that way.
Wow.
But it's huge.
I was impressed. It was fun to watch. It was fun to watch the coverage.
It was compelling to watch. It was compelling to sort of lead a digital team behind the scenes. I got my first hint that something was happening the day that Lincoln Riley left, when we got that email. It's been, talked about on Twitter. Dean tweeted about it, where he noted just to the sports department that Lincoln didn't show up. I remember looking over to my wife and say, something's up here. That's very unusual. And it turned out that the news broke, right afterward. And for not just our team, but for every digital journalist, sports news and otherwise, that's when you all of a sudden start to follow the big insider beat reporters, whether it be from your own team or others, and turn on notification. So I basically we all spent the next 2 weeks on Twitter.
Yeah.
Had this been 25 years ago, we would have had to wait until 10 o'clock, right?
Yes. Well, I mean, think about the Bob Stoops news. I mean, I lived in Texas at the time. I had to wait for a newspaper, because we couldn't get Oklahoma City stations down there. Or Sports Center. You'd get it from Sports Center.
Yeah, I remember the early days of Sports Center. As a television station I worked at, we sent crews to tape Sports Center on cable TV. It's absolutely prehistoric. What does this tell you about? So this is, we're now doing a Wednesday night all digital news magazine. Mm-hmm. Augusta's doing one on Tuesday night. We've been doing the doc panel for a year and a half now. Not just this, but those examples, but also we've got Frontier and OK Watch and all of these folks that they don't print anything on paper. Right. It's absolutely all digital. So give us an idea about where all this is heading. You saw how the stories were covered this week. What
you bet.
In terms of hard news, where's it going?
I think it's choose your own adventure. When it comes to newspaper or digital or television, people flock to the medium that sort of best fits their lifestyle. I tell this to folks on my team, anybody, and I don't say it to virtue signal at all, but I pay a tithe to journalism. I think it's important to pay for journalism. And so I have a few subscriptions that I do just on principle, whether or not I use it or not. And for me, for this particular event, it was Twitter. It was free Twitter. However, I think where this is headed is the evolution of news events to just turn into events, period. The coverage with Tevis and Storm and Ashley earlier in the day on Sunday was compelling. It was gripping. When Brent Venables came to Westheimer Airfield, I just couldn't turn away. And I think even if the populace as a whole might say in focus groups that we're not watching news like we used to, au contraire, they are. It's just in different forms. Some people like the sort of wonky discussions about data and going in depth. I love that. But I also love severe weather coverage. I love to see breaking news coverage. And by the way, the ratings for all stations bear that out, that other people do too. So I think it provided a lot more competition. Whether you're talking about folks who work at smaller newspapers, work at digital only, work in sports radio, everybody was hustling. I was impressed with everybody. And I know how hard Dean worked. I know how hard other folks worked. And I just thought the product was better for it. And by the way, some good, some bad. It did seem like we were all guessing, but I will tell you, having the insight that I have with the people I work with, this situation was fluid. It was ever changing. It was not cut and dry one person from the very, very beginning. It may seem like that at the end, but it was a very fluid situation, and the coverage reflected that.
So you said choose your own. So
Yeah.
how do you see people absorbing their news right now? What's the data tell us? You've got OTT. This is on OTT. You've got the platforms. I'm still trying to get LinkedIn. If you're out there and you're with LinkedIn, you're sure missing a lot of viewers because haven't done anything live yet. Twitter, Instagram. I mean, people are getting their news on these platforms. I mean, people have subscriptions to OK Watch and the Frontier, as well as the newspapers that they have never, like the World in Oklahoma, that people never see print. It's all coming across their computer. Is television as we know it, is it going to be different in 10 years?
I think there's going to be more of it. I said this 15 years ago. I think we're going to get to the point personally where local TV is mostly news, and it's local news. I think it's, again, the ratings bear this out. TV is still king. Local TV is still king. I'm a pretty loyal watcher of Brian Stelter's Reliable Sources on Sundays, where they talk about national trends, and even they say nationally on a national network, local TV is still the most influential news that there is out there. However, I will tell you, as a member of the Oklahoma Media Center, funded by the Inasmuch Foundation, there are so many good journalists, the Frontier, State Impact, Free Press. I would fail to name them all. They are all excellent. And I've thought about, if I were a really wealthy man, just subscribing to all of them on principle, because they're fantastic. And it just depends what flavor you want that day. Sometimes you just want the headline, sometimes you want to watch it, and sometimes you want to read something in depth.
Well, we appreciate you taking some time. Of course, people know, anybody that watches our streams know that we couldn't do any of this without you. But at the same time, the most interesting thing that people like myself, Larry Bookman on Monday, Augusta and her series, is what does the data say? That's the most important thing. And what the data is telling us is you better, and by the way, Ryan Welton turned me on to Gary Vaynerchuk, who's, his aspect of it, his viewpoint is, well, I think the saying he's saying is we're just all day trading for attention.
That's 100% correct.
And you've got to be in all these platforms. If you're trying to stay on one platform, you're not going to succeed.
Right. And you have to be consistent. For anybody who wants to do this, you just have to persevere and not give up, even when you think you don't have an audience. Keep pushing.
All right, and we'll do in our last bit before we say goodbye to Ryan is that I just did this week, over the weekend, taped an interview with Ryan Welton about music and Dino Lawley. He's an obscure movie guy some of you may have heard of, a longtime friend, about stocking stuffers for music from Ryan's standpoint, and Dino, what movies to go see, which ones to not go see. We're going to be doing that video, Augusta, here's a teaser, next Wednesday.
Okay,
and
great.
It's a real long video, so guess what? We're going to be chopping that and placing it on different platforms for different consumers, because of a lot of it, it's a different crowd. Music, movies, there are folks that consume both, and different age groups consume other things in terms of music. And Ryan's got a handle on that as a musician, as people know who watch our streams. So we're very grateful. So we'll try to go do you a good job tonight, Mr. Welton, and thanks for joining us.
Very welcome. Thank you very much. I'll keep watching.
All right. See
you. We'll see you.
Bye-bye.
So as we said, he forgets more than I ever knew about this.
Oh, he's so knowledgeable. It's actually really encouraging to hear from him that, local news is still dominant in terms of TV. But I think it's encouraging to see a metro like Oklahoma City have so many healthy independent platforms, digital platforms. I know we're talking about this in terms of the new OU coach, but digital kind of killed journalism in a sense in terms of people getting information. And it's, it's like journalists are still gatekeepers of true, accurate, contextual information. And to compete in a digital space with a lot of information that is not screened in the same way, I guess information lost its gatekeeper in journalism, which there's historically been a lot of, issues with. But it's encouraging to hear, kind of like some positive information about, where trends are going. People want local news. People want to read in-depth stories. We're competing for attention on digital platforms, but people are out there wanting good information.
Hey, and I'll tell you one, and see if you like this segue. One of the areas where that we just simply do not get enough information is health. Anybody who follows anything about public health knows that our numbers are really not good, and I don't see them getting good anytime in the future, just botching up my English. But I think your next guest has got some insight, an incredible story that I just read today, which is it's enlightening in some ways, indicative of the steps that we need to make in terms of health equity in our state of Oklahoma.
Yeah, absolutely. We have Read Frontier's health reporter, a very important assignment in the state of Oklahoma, Kassie McClung. And Kassie, thank you for joining us to talk about your story.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
So just to intro it a little bit, we talked about it a little bit earlier. The headline, in Oklahoma, Black families turn to doulas for better births. Kassie, talk to me about where you got your spark to start this story.
Yeah, so I've been reporting on maternal health issues for a few years now, and I've written about health inequities before, but I kind of wanted to revisit this topic around Black maternal health. And I think so many of us are familiar with the statistics of, the inequities that do exist in outcomes, but I kind of wanted to approach it in a way, looking at what solutions might be out there and also what communities are doing to address this problem. And I got to meet some amazing Oklahomans who are really doing grassroots efforts to address this problem and try to help families have healthier births and bring about new resources and tackle this issue in really interesting ways.
I love the storytelling of your piece and the way you kind of like brought readers into the living room with these families that are taking someone into their family at like the most special moment. I mean, talk to me about who these doulas are and the work that they do.
Yeah, sure. And I think that's by far my most favorite part of reporting on these types of stories is just people are gracious enough to let me into their homes and see this process of them preparing for labor and bringing a new baby into their family. So one of the women I spent time with, her name's Ashley Wilson. She's a doula in Tulsa with the Tulsa Birth Equity Initiative. And they're a newer organization in Tulsa. But so essentially, for the unfamiliar, a doula is a non-medical birth worker, and they can come in, help families before the baby comes. They'll help with labor positions and just kind of coaching a family into what to expect, how to prepare their home for a baby. A doula will attend the birth, help advocate for families, help them find a voice for themselves so they know how to advocate for themselves inside the doctor's office. And then a lot of times doulas will also hang around postpartum and help families with lactation and safe sleep practices. But what you referenced the beginning of my story was Ashley was coming in and teaching this couple how to just different birthing positions and just kind of how to work together as a team and how his name is Daniel could support Carmen during her labor and how they could communicate with each other. And she kind of tried to give him an idea of what to expect too and what she would be experiencing. So it was just a really interesting experience. And these are women, the doulas really care about their community and, they want to build a village and a support system for families.
Yeah, very cool. Talk to us a little bit about some of the historic issues with maternity, just health outcomes for all women, but particularly for Black women in Oklahoma.
Yeah, so I can talk a little bit as a whole for a minute, and then I'll kind of zoom into the racial inequities. But so Oklahoma, Scott mentioned it earlier, the state doesn't rank well in pretty much any kind of health outcomes. Oklahoma does not rank well. And the same is true for maternal and infant mortality. So a big issue for a while that hopefully the state will start seeing improvement with is Medicaid expansion. So before July, before Medicaid expansion went into effect here, a lot of times after people would have their babies, weeks later they would be losing their health insurance coverage because Medicaid wasn't expanded yet. So that can be really dangerous for, let alone losing your health coverage, which is a huge deal on its own, but you just delivered a baby. And a lot of these deaths, unfortunately, they occur after birth and the weeks following. So if someone doesn't have health insurance, they can't follow up. They can't, maybe they're worried about something, but it's in the back of their mind. They don't want to go to the hospital, get in debt, leave, their family, take time off work. So that was a big issue. And another big factor I want to point out is that Oklahoma's Maternal Mortality Committee has found that more than 70% of maternal deaths are preventable. And that kind of leads me into talking about the racial disparities. And a lot of it, so much of it comes to structural racism. And that means not only explicit and implicit biases in the healthcare field, but also, just a lack of safe housing, food deserts, chronic stress, which can lead to chronic conditions. What researchers are calling it is weathering, which essentially means that Black Americans, their health deteriorates at a rate faster than white Americans because of the constant stressors and conditions brought on by structural racism. So it's a really complex issue. There's a lot of different factors going into it, but it all contributes to the higher rates of maternal deaths among Black Oklahomans and Black Americans, and also higher rates of life-threatening complications that come with pregnancies as well.
Okay, and some of the solutions. Well, explain to us, you touched briefly on Medicaid expansion, better access to healthcare, community-based solutions like doulas who are branching out. But any other kind of solutions-focused reporting that you did on this article, please share with us.
Sure. I can start with, obviously Medicaid expansion is such a huge one for, so many people coming into pregnancy, they weren't able to qualify for Medicaid coverage until they became pregnant. Because once you're pregnant, it's a lot easier to qualify for those benefits. So Medicaid expansion should help before pregnancy and after pregnancy with that. And as far as doulas go, it's really interesting. There's kind of a nationwide movement to get states to cover doula services. So there's more and more states that are passing legislation, more Medicaid programs in different states are looking at how they can offer coverage for doula services. And there is a ton of research behind doulas and what they can do to improve birth outcomes. I think one study I cited said they reduce the rate of C-sections, they reduce low birth weights in infants. People are less likely to use medication during birth. They're more likely just to have a good birth experience, which, should be the most basic of basic, right? Having a positive, good, meaningful birth experience. So there's been a movement to cover that. I think in my story, I said more than 20 states just in 2021 introduced some kind of legislation exploring doula services or how Medicaid might be able to cover doula services, but Oklahoma hasn't gotten there yet.
Okay. Are you anticipating any of that legislation this year? Just out of curiosity.
I don't know yet. My story just came out a few days ago. I haven't heard anything about it yet. But Oklahoma, if some lawmaker did introduce some legislation surrounding doula services, Oklahoma would join probably half the states in the nation that have already done so.
Okay. What surprised you in the process of reporting this story?
Yeah, that's a good question. I've been reporting on this for a few years, but I think I've learned so much about birth workers. I've heard the term doula before, but I didn't realize how significant of a difference they could make and how much research was out there on how they can improve outcomes. And I thought it was really interesting just to think that having an extra support person there to guide you through pregnancy and guide your family through pregnancy could have such a huge impact on health outcomes. But it really does, and it's well documented, and that body of research is growing. So I had heard of the word doula, but I didn't think it could play, or doulas could play, such a significant role in birth outcomes, other than obviously providing comfort to families or to someone while they're giving labor. But they do make a huge difference in the outcomes.
Wow, fascinating. Scott, what do you think?
It is fascinating. Kassie, could I ask you like a really dumb question? What is the difference between a doula and a midwife?
Oh, that's not a dumb question at all. That's actually something I learned while I was reporting on this too. So a midwife is actually, if we're talking about a certified midwife, they play more of a medical role. So a certified midwife is a nurse, a registered nurse, or some kind of nurse who often works under a physician's supervision. So they can do stuff like they can actually help deliver the baby, like be more hands-on with the medical part of it. And doulas aren't allowed to do that. They're not allowed to do the medical stuff. They're not allowed to, actually, I talked to a few doulas about this. It's actually a pretty big deal. You're not allowed to, like reach out and help guide the baby or touch,
Wow.
while someone's giving birth. So midwife, more medical, doula is more of a support person.
I didn't know. So they're like a case manager as opposed to actually delivering the baby.
Yeah, you could say that.
Got to follow up just to touch on, you were talking about the implementation and the hope that we can start looking at some of these health inequities that maybe Medicaid expansion. You know this, and I know your team is watching this, but there's just a nasty little fight out there about who's calling the shots on healthcare policy in the state. And I would not be honest if I didn't say that it's just kind of a mess out there right now. The State Department of Health has lost another leader there the public health lab stories are out there. Today I saw, I think it was News Now, I saw Keith Reed, who's a really good, righteous dude, saying we got the problems fixed. I'm not sure the legislature understands that. There's a rub there. We all saw the Loft report on TSET. I mean, if you were to give it a grade, it would just go, it's kind of like the end of Animal House, nothing to see, move along, and things burning in the background, right? I mean, it is what it is. It is a mess, and everybody knows it, even though some people are trying to get a good face on this. Then you have the discussion right now between, managed care and the healthcare authority. I mean, all of this is unsettled, might be the nice way to say this. Where do you see any of this getting resolved, or attempt to resolve this in the legislative session or even 2022? I think back in the days of when they lost 30 million, the State Department of Health, and I think maybe that was the good old days. It just seems to be mass chaos right now. A lot of people are looking the other way, trying to put a good face on this, but Kassie, it's not. So How do you see it being resolved?
Oh, it's complicated. No, but I don't have all the answers. I know you mentioned the health department, you mentioned the healthcare authority, and it's all really convoluted and complicated. But I do anticipate, I mean, we know the managed care battle isn't over. We have the legislature and the governor kind of tugging back and forth on whether managed care is going to happen. So I'm sure we'll hear more about that in the legislative session. As far as the health department goes, we saw some turmoil before the pandemic, and we're still kind of seeing it now. There's been a lot of overturn. There's been a lot of leadership changes. But I hate to try to make any predictions. I can talk about policy, but as far as the health department goes, I think I mean, I guess we'll just have to see because that's as far as I'm going to go on that one, I think.
To be decided.
To be decided.
Time will tell.
Time will tell.
Well,
exactly.
Cassie, thank you so much. Everybody go check out readfrontier.org. Top story is Cassie's story on birth doulas. It's a fascinating topic. Maybe
can
you'll
I plug
influence
something real
Please
quick?
plug.
Sorry. So if anyone interested in learning more about the story or disparities, or they want to know what kind of resources are out there for families, or they want to know how the community can help more, just help families and pregnant people in general, we are having a virtual free forum tomorrow at 7 p.m. And you can register ahead of time if you'd like, or you can just jump in on Facebook whenever. I have tweeted out the link a few times. So I had to plug that real quick before I jumped off here.
Absolutely. Great. Well, Cassie, thank you so much again. And go check for those resources, anyone, if you're interested in more information on this topic. Certainly lots to be learned here.
Thank you.
Thanks. That's a great work, by the way. It was a really great story, and I appreciate your work on this.
Oh, thank you. And thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
All right. Goodbye.
All right. That's just, I think it's so cool to see, reporters doing, I mean, she's such an asset to have like one person at a publication dedicated to health reporting. I mean, she's speaking out of years of experience in Oklahoma, reporting on health disparities and these kind of complicated topics. And to the point where she's kind of subject matter expert on these things. So it'll be exciting to continue to follow her work. She might influence a legislator to introduce some legislation to have doula healthcare covered. That's how meaningful this work is.
Yeah.
So,
and by the way, that
cool
works when people pay attention. I remember a few years ago, Oklahoma City County using some Obamacare money went into the zip code, actually where the city county Department of Health is located. And one of the, I'm on the board. In fact, next month in February, I'll be terming out after a couple of terms. But I was able to see firsthand whenever public health professionals target an area and the zip code where the city county health department is located had very high stroke rates for African-American men over 50. So there were public health workers able to go into the community and talk to these men about high blood pressure and things that they could do to bring down the blood pressure. And they did it. I mean, the data showed that they went into the community and lowered blood pressure, which is lowered the amount of strokes in the African-American community in Northeast Oklahoma County. I mean, it's simply amazing that this can be done. But before you can address a problem, you've got to understand there's a problem. And so this is I've heard of this, but to have Cassie focusing on this usually when people that have ears to hear and officials understand these problems exist, you can address them. So kudos to Read Frontier and to Cassie working on this project.
Yeah, absolutely. Great to have her on. And up next, pivoting to a different topic, we have the executive director of the ACLU of Oklahoma joining us, Tamya Cox-Toure. Thank you so much for being here and for joining us this evening. Your organization's doing a lot of important work surrounding questions of the death penalty as more executions are scheduled and underway in Oklahoma. Tomorrow at 10 a.m., Bigler Stouffer is scheduled to be executed. Been following reporting, there's all the last minute court asks and appeals and everything that kind of winds up in the days before these executions. And talk to us about, I think there's an interesting civil rights question in the state right now surrounding our lethal injection process. And, the death penalty is a controversial sentence. It's nationwide. But I guess, where are your thoughts at tonight?
For sure. One, thank you so much for having me. I think the death penalty has been on the fronts of the minds of a lot of Oklahomans, really starting when we had, when the Attorney General had scheduled dates, right? We knew we had big cases like Julius Jones. We had this huge this huge trial coming up at the end of February. And so we were all concerned when death penalties were executions were scheduled, despite all of that happening. What we do know is what our biggest concern is right now is that we do not have confidence in our lethal injection protocols because nothing's changed. We have to remember that the reason why Oklahoma has not had executions for the last 5+ years was because of the 2 botched executions earlier, 2015-ish. And the idea that those protocols have not changed, and we are aware that those protocols haven't changed with our latest execution with Mr. Grant. So our concern really is that what is the rush and the urgency to schedule executions. And we definitely feel that we're seeing this execution spree happening. We have one tomorrow. We have others scheduled for January and February. And we're concerned that this is the route that our leadership has taken and chose to take.
Yeah. And, executions, I was, just kind of casting around for different reports on this topic. And there's a Vice News report, which had an interesting number in it. And I guess Bigler Stouffer, he's been, I believe, on death row for 36 years. And he's but he's been alive for 133 executions.
Yep.
I mean, this is an institution in the state administering the death penalty as a sentence. Maybe touch a little bit on what's brought us to this point, not only the stay of executions in 2015, but just kind of the history of executions in Oklahoma.
For sure. I think it's just really important to recognize that Oklahoma has been very punitive with sentencing for so long, in the sense of death penalty has been, part of the criminal justice system. And just recently, within the last, few years, enshrined into our Constitution through a state question. It's a route that we definitely have been opposing since our beginning here, obviously locally, but as a whole ACLU affiliates across the country. But the path that how we get here is always political. And I think that's the part of it that is the most concerning, right? We had a very conservative governor with Governor Fallon that, because of the botched executions, put a moratorium on there. And we had a very much conservative attorney general with Attorney General Mike Hunter, who also agreed to not schedule any executions until this current litigation is completed. So when new political leaders come on board, that's when the change happens. And I think that's just important to note that these are policy changes because of change administration. But yeah, it's a route that Oklahoma has taken for so long. And I think it's just really important to describe just even the process that when someone is, sentenced to capital punishment or execution to a death sentence, they are immediately taken to our H unit. Our H unit is, essentially underground. They are living in solitary confinement with very little access to, community, with access to family. They're behind glass, when on the H unit. And then when they are, as with those that have already been scheduled for an execution, they're on death watch, what they call death watch, which is, again, limited access to family and friends, limited access to spiritual leaders. What they are given, their possessions are even limited. So we see this as heinous and torturous, and definitely a violation of cruel and inhumane settings. And that's what our concern has always been. But regardless, I think in this instance where we are now, regardless of how people feel about death penalty and how they feel about capital punishment, the fact that we know that current protocols are torturing people at the end of their lives, and we know that those protocols have yet to be changed, I don't think any Oklahoman should feel confident that we should be administering these executions right now.
So talk a little bit about the upcoming trial that will, look at the Eighth Amendment issues with our current lethal injection protocol, and kind of when that starts and what you're anticipating seeing with that.
Right. So at the end of the February, we will have, and I say we as in like community. This is not an ACLU case, but the trial will begin to challenge the current protocols. And I also think it's just really important to know like what that means as far as the case is around challenging Oklahoma's current protocols. It's not necessarily challenging the death penalty in Oklahoma. And so we as an organization really want to go further and say we want to end all executions. But I think February's case will be one of the first times that we will, as a community and as the public, learn about Oklahoma's protocols because they're so secretive. And the transparency has never been a part of these protocols. Those that will follow the case will have potentially a better understanding of the current protocols, as well as a better understanding. And I think for the first time, if anyone's been really following any of the clemency hearings, specifically the Pardon and Parole Board talked a little bit about they felt confident in our lethal injection protocols when they had like a state witness talk more about the protocols or gave them more confidence. Mm-hmm. But that was a state witness. That was not the defendant's witness or the defendant's medical experts able to really talk about the problems with the current protocol. And I think this upcoming trial litigation will at least kind of reveal some of the issues that we believe come with the current protocol. So we are supporting the measures of the attorneys. But despite that, our work doesn't stop, regardless how the case, however the case ends. Is like we are still focusing on ways that we can end the death penalty in Oklahoma and really have those hard conversations to be had with policymakers.
Okay. And kind of on the topic of the Pardon and Parole Board, we were just briefly touching on a little bit earlier, you're supporting efforts to petition for an investigation into DA David Prater over some of the actions that he took in regards to the Pardon and Parole Board. Maybe just frame for us the situation that has, kind of brought us up to the point of a petition being submitted this week. And yeah, maybe just in brief so the audience understands.
For sure. So community members came together really after we were seeing some atrocious behavior from our current district attorney around against the members of the Pardon and Parole Board. However, I think some of the actions that we believe the district attorney has taken, I think goes further than the Pardon and Parole Board. Just by the I think the policing of Black bodies has been an issue. Some of the exorbitant charges to those that were protesting during the uprisings a few summers ago. So it was more for a lot of us came together and said it's not just what's happening with the Pardon and Parole Board as to why we would ask for a grand jury to approve an investigation of the district attorney's office. And as you know or may know that in order to call for that grand jury as just citizens and public members, we had to collect enough signatures. And through some heroic efforts, over 5,000 signatures were collected. That was the threshold. And were delivered to the court clerk. And then ultimately has already been handed over to the state election board to verify those signatures. It was really an opportunity for Oklahomans, specifically those in Oklahoma City, to come together and kind of, address and redress grievances that we had.
Okay. And so just tell me about the process. So the signatures are turned into the court clerk or to the election board, and then they're going to, or the election office, excuse me. Mm-hmm. Gosh, it's late. The election office, they're going to confirm those signatures. And then what's next in the process?
So the next process, from understanding it, it really, I mean, if those signatures are confirmed, and if there are not any other litigation opportunities of the district attorney to kind of to stop this from going forward, I can imagine there could be potential litigation that could happen. Then it would be, our hope is that a grand jury would be impaneled, and then they would do a thorough investigation of the district attorney and the wrongdoings we believe that has occurred under his watch.
Okay. And I mean, we were talking a little bit earlier with Kassie. Some of her reporting touches on, you know, the impacts of structural racism, and here you are approaching that same question in the criminal justice realm. Maybe talk a little bit about the history of the death penalty nationally in this state in terms of structural racism, and just your insights on that.
Yeah, I think that's a great, connection that we don't necessarily talk about, because for many times the death penalty, there are a lot of reasons, a crime has to kind of lead to the level of heinous before a death penalty sentencing could even be established. But what we also know is that a lot of the reasons when a death penalty is even on the table, so a death sentence is even on the table, really depends on was it the color, the race of the defendant, so the race of the defendant and the race of the victim. It really depends on if the defendant is able to hire, an attorney, or if they have to go through a public defense. And so there's all these other issues that lead that there is a very connection between race and economics. And we know that because of those instances, that a lot of the times those play the biggest factor on if the death penalty is even on the table. And that's part of the structural racism and the issue that happens in criminal justice and in the legal system. And those are the things why we talk about, one of the many reasons why we really say we'd like to end the death penalty, because of the history of the death penalty being very racist, very arbitrary on who is given the death penalty, given a death sentence, and who's not. And we feel we have a duty to ensure that all trials are fair. And one of the best things that we can do to get there is to remove the death penalty from even consideration.
Okay. And if community members want to learn more about your work and about this, if community members want to learn more about your work, where can they find it?
Oh, great question. We were really excited. And going back to your conversation earlier regarding print media, we did a full page ad in the Oklahoman today with those that signed on with a letter to the governor asking to end the death penalty. And just the amount of support we have received from people that were reading the paper and saw the ad, was really, we were really excited about that. We were also able to do patch through calls where we had almost over 500 Oklahomans call directly into the governor's office to ask him to end the death penalty. And then if people are wanting more information, to do a form letter, which would be an email that would go directly to the governor's desk as well, or governor's office, they can go to our website, which is acluok.org. But we recognize that this is a battle that, has long-term implications. And this is an area we believe so much and passionate that we have to continue to fight for, and will continue to fight for, even if these executions go through.
All right, thank you. Scott has got a couple questions.
Yeah.
So and I would also say that it's been kind of long-standing to me for some time now. There's a standing invitation with District Attorney Prater. A lot of people have questions, and a lot of things have said things about District Attorney Prater, and I've said to him, at the time that you wish, unfiltered, we'll sit down and have this conversation, and hopefully we'll get to do that at some point.
Right.
So, Tamya, if I could ask you a couple of questions about county. We've been focusing a little bit, trying to do a little more scalpel as opposed to bludgeon on the county detention center here recently. Mm-hmm. And what kind of got us started was a discussion that was had at the commissioners meeting a few weeks ago about physical changes to the building. Mm-hmm. So I was so interested in that I actually took a tour, and there's obviously have been some huge changes down there. But as I pointed out, and belabored this, which is that we're just talking about the physical aspect of the building, not that everything's fixed. I mean, now we've got a new jail on the horizon. Ironically, it's going to take the DA signing off on that to get that done. But my question to you is, there are two really large facilities in the state that are not DOC, the Tulsa Detention Center, Oklahoma County Detention Center. You're watching what's going on down there, and as voters, and I think the bottom line is the district attorney would have to okay using some of the ARPA funds to help build this jail, or it just ain't going to happen, as they say. But let's say it does go forward. So, two-part question. Number one, what would you programmatically change at the detention center today if you could do that? And number two, as we start to think about a new facility in the future, in the event that happens, what would you say? What would you say to voters? This needs to include this for this to be something that we don't have these headlines that we've had over the past 30 years. So it's kind of a loaded question, but it's two-part. Could you take a shot at that?
Sure. And I will just, for full transparency, the ACLU has been very vocal against building a new jail. And we had worked with the consultants and had private conversations as well as public conversations regarding our feelings about the new jail. Because we truly believe, and I think this goes to your first question, is that the new jail won't help the structural issues that are happening. And structural meaning like systematic issues regarding the need to end cash bail, in our opinion, the need to ensure that fines and fees, a lot of the times people are currently in our Oklahoma County Detention Center because they are too poor to pay for the fines that they've had from charges before. So they're in our system. They are in the county jail. So we believe the systematic issues on how we do better or get to a better system is by addressing those issues first. And we've tried to address those issues through policy, through working with the jail trust, and through working with policy leaders at the state capitol. And I think programming, like one of the things that we think helps is really to giving judges the opportunity to really determine if detention is even necessary, and giving them more leeway and more being more fluid with sentencing. I think that helps. I think what we believe helps. And we currently are working on ways to do that. It's really hard for us to think about because we have not only a local policy, but a national policy around no new jail facilities. It's really difficult to think about. We know that this is going to happen, right? And we know that there are people on both sides of the aisle that actually are supporting a new jail, specifically Representative Lowe, who has been one of the biggest supporters of criminal justice reform. He recognizes the need for a new jail. But so it's really hard to say, like, what could that new jail have? Our concern is that this new jail will be bigger than our current jail. And with it bigger, they will find ways to put more people in it. And they will find different ways to house people. And that's our biggest concern. And that is what we've been talking about. If we can find a way that this new jail is actually smaller than the current facility, which I could imagine a world where that would happen. I know even in the CJAC meetings, they had talked about, finding this land and building upon it, but wanting to get extra land and securing other land for future build outs. And that is extremely problematic to me. And I think lastly, real quick, is that I know there has also been talked about better facilities in-house, specifically to address mental health. And our concern is we don't want people to address mental health while they're in the detention. We want those kind of community services to happen before people even get to the detention center. So we don't necessarily think that is a fix for us. I don't know if that really answered your questions, but those are some of the things that we have been actually discussing with the consultants around the new jail, and have serious concerns about it.
Can I follow up, Augusta, with one? It's a very good pivot on the new jail, by the way. That's like Major League Sunday morning pivot. Okay, I appreciate that. Talk to us about, you've hit on a couple of things that I've been hearing from people about. Number one is you'll have these stories where somebody gets out, and like the Chickasha murders, okay? And that heinous and people say, oh, there's somebody that shouldn't have been out. But then there are stories about people in there that really no harm to themselves and they can't OR out for health or mental health issues. So the judges have a really tough job. I mean, sometimes it's, how to divide the baby. So your suggestion, talk to our folks about this cash bond issue. People hear about it all the time, but I think 99% of people that have heard that are not really sure what that means and how that would impact the population at the jail and also impact violent criminals or keeping the violent criminals there. Could you help us out on that one?
So I think the best way I can talk about our hope to end cash bail is really the idea that people, who are in a position that have the funds and resources to get the money to bail out or to bond out, they're typically in a different, economic bracket, or they have the resources and support that others don't. And even bail then could be determined by, the severity of the crime. However, even in those instances where, bail is still given to some quote unquote violent or non-violent crimes, we don't necessarily think that is necessarily the testament or the kind of maybe the threshold. We believe that if we can end cash bail and give judges more discretion on whether it's additional supervision, which could be very problematic in some situations, or the idea that this person is not a flight risk, not a danger, not, A, B, C, or D. We believe that the judge, as well as the attorneys that are involved in the case, are the best decision makers for that. And not just a kind of list of, okay, you did crime A, B, and C, I'm going to, set bail at whatever. I think we have to play into the bigger factors of that. And I think once we're able to do that and get to a position where we can do that, we can really think about criminal justice reform. And I think that's ultimately, for us, ending cash bail is part of the bigger criminal justice reform work that we're trying to do.
I have one quick follow, if I could, I guess. Yeah.
Absolutely.
And I promise I won't say anything else.
No, great question, Scott. Appreciate you.
Who are the special interest on both sides of the cash bail issue? Number one, because I think one of the things I hope we can do in this program is a lot of issues, people simply don't know who's behind them. It doesn't mean they're bad people. It just means I don't know who the players are in this. So number one, their interest on both sides of this issue. Number two, if you were to end cash bail, for example, I know that at one time there's like $3,000 worth of people. It's down to about 1,500. Do you have any idea what that might do percentage-wise to a building like Oklahoma County Detention Center in terms of reducing the amount of people in there?
Yeah. I mean, I'll answer the second question first. I think our hope and our expectation, and through some of the research that we've done, is that it could potentially greatly reduce the number of folks that are currently at the county detention. Because one of the things we don't also talk about, a lot of these folks are there, on pre-detainers, right? Like they're there prior to trial because they can't, secure the funds to bail or bond out. The special interest groups for us, I think kind of, in my limited knowledge, and we have definitely experts that could probably talk more. We always think about like the bail bondsmen, and like that is a very big interest group as well. That's somewhat very powerful in the sense of what they can do. They very much have lobbyists and they have people on the ground. And a lot of the times, the special interest group could also be district attorneys' offices. And it's hard for me to special interest group on the other side, because I feel like on the other side that we're supporting is very much activists and organizations that are really trying to move criminal justice reform forward. But I think that is fair. And I think that's actually a great point, is that really talking about like who on both sides really talk about ending cash bail, and like what are the motivations for sure.
Sometimes I find it, there's a baseball agent named Scott Boras. Mm-hmm. So I like sports and I'll watch them, and they'll talk about where these baseball players are going to go in the hot stove league. And I'm like, just talk to Scott Boras. He controls the thing. So, I mean, why are you waiting around and just talking to sports guys? Scott Boras runs the program, right? Doesn't make him a bad guy, but he's the player in that deal. And so that's why I think sometimes my frustration is I want reporters and observers, go talk to them.
Yeah.
I mean, these are the people that have most at stake. That's the skin in the game, so to speak. So I appreciate your candor on that, Tamya. And I think it's been a great conversation about these issues, because they're flashpoint. And by the way, I mean, I say this in all seriousness, I've worked on both sides of ACLU, right? On issues where ACLU was on the side I was on back in my lobbying days, and vice versa. So I'm wondering, do you find ACLU a little less flashpointy in terms of politics these days? I mean, there were years and years ago that people would make an issue that so and so is carrying an ACLU card, as if like that was a really bad guy. I don't hear as much about that. Some circles you do, but ACLU as an entity, what do you think your brand is like these days? I guess is my question.
I think when people talk about our brand, I think they see consistency. I think they think of a national brand in the sense that because we are one of the few organizations that are in every state, including Puerto Rico and some of the territories, and a mission and a brand that hasn't changed in the the 100+ years we've been around. I think you're right, though. I think in some circles, saying you're a card-carrying member of the ACLU goes far. I think some people still don't know what the ACLU does. And then I think there are some people that for maybe just one reason, whether it's our issue, our stance on choice or a stance on criminal justice reform, they can get with us and support us on other issues, but maybe not those issues. And we recognize we are one of the few organizations that is very multi-issue. But I think ultimately for us, we are able to rely and lean heavily in our, U.S. and state constitutions. We're able to lean heavily on our focus on dismantling white supremacy and dismantling systems that are racist and oppressed. And I think that's where people are able to join in because they can see that play out in a lot of different areas.
Absolutely. I would say for myself, when I'm working on an issue, working on a story, and this has been true since I started reporting, 5-7 years ago, and I wasn't clear on what the Constitution said, and I wasn't clear on what is the civil rights question, what is the human rights question in this issue. The ACLU has always been a very consistent source of that information and that perspective.
And I think that's been our main goal, is that we live and die by our constitutions and those rights guaranteed. But we also recognize that those rights should be evolving, that we can't just lean in on, a document that was created, without some people considered. And we don't think that is inconsistent with our mission when we are, supporting gay marriage or when we are supporting trans rights. We don't think that's inconsistent with the work and the ultimate goals of our organization, because we know those have to evolve as time goes on, and we feel committed to that, and we're easy to reconcile that.
Right. Tamya Cox-Toure, Executive Director of the ACLU of Oklahoma, thank you so much for being with us tonight, sharing your expertise, and thank you for your work in the community. She talked a little bit earlier about where you can find those resources. You can find the ACLU on every social platform, website. So if you want more information on the work that they're doing, it's out there.
Thank you.
Okay. Have a great rest of your evening.
Yeah, Tamya, thanks very much. We should also say Tamya Cox-Toure, JD. So
JD, yes.
I do want to add that. And thanks for adding to the marketplace of ideas.
Thank you so much. Appreciate it.
All right. Thank you. Well, hey, she was a great interview, Augusta. Great interview.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, the depth of knowledge and expertise on a variety of topics. So really grateful to have her on tonight. And her beautiful name did not deserve the way I treated it. But by the end of the show, Tamya Cox-Toure.
You got it 100%. Well, we're very grateful, first off, for the support that we get from Ryan Welton, News 9, News on 6. Grateful to the support from Augusta McDonnell, who has elevated this program. And I want to say, if you haven't caught her Tuesday night stream dealing with education, there are old people like me that are look at the past and look at past campaigns and go and use that aspect of their life to go, I think 2022 is going to be about education, at least the gubernatorial race in Oklahoma. School board elections, I know you got some pieces coming up on that. I guess those are going to be very hot. We've seen what's going on with that. So local politics is going to turn out to be massively important and volatile in these elections that are coming up. We're less than a month away from the new year. We're going to see the session start in less than 60 days. It's going to be an election year. We've got statewide officials up for election. Talking about education. They're going to be talking about health. Who managed this well? Who didn't manage this well when it comes to health issues? So it's going to be very, very, very volatile time. And the Tuesday night program is one of those. I think I caught you saying last night you're going to continue the Tuesday night stream on education right through the legislative session.
Yes, and thank you, Scott, for your kind words. I'm so pleased to be a part of this. I so enjoy, getting to have people on, having some longer conversations, and hopefully, I hope I'm not too high-minded, but hoping that this work contributes in a meaningful way to the viewers and to the community as we all kind of seek to understand our local issues, political issues, more clearly. So the show on Tuesdays will continue through the legislature. I've been assigned to the Capitol. And we'll be covering the legislative session, probably focusing on education policy. And I'm really looking this year to, it'll be an interesting question of the way politics interfere or touch on issues in education. I think we've seen that really, be a big topic of conversation. There's been, legislative action in the past couple of years surrounding schools. COVID, of course, highlighted a lot of division in how schools should manage, COVID mitigation policies, et cetera. And, we have House Bill 1775, which has played out in some interesting ways. Lots of questions about that. So I think, and in terms of, we have our superintendent of public instruction running for governor, changing parties to run as a Democrat, Joy Hoffmeister. I think there will just be no end to, work that needs to be done to present really clear, factual, contextual information about current issues, because there's going to be a lot of voices out there saying a lot. And I hope that Tuesday's show, of course, Health Watch on Mondays with you, Scott, is a great resource of good information. And this show tonight continue to be places where people can come to find, good, clear, accurate information and, good sources, good perspectives, great questions. And yes, so much more to come.
I think it's a good way to close it, to come full circle, Augusta, is we start off with Ryan talking about the digital space. And I've had a couple of people go, what are you trying to get done on these programs?
Yeah.
Back when I was, back before electricity, when I was roaming the Capitol, there were a lot of programs. There were public television in Oklahoma. There was talk radio. There were some really great, now retired Hall of Fame journalists who had programs that would have roundtables of journalists, and you would figure out what was going on. It's that stuff between the bricks. Jerry Bonin, who did his programs back on KTOK when they did news, and public television when they had their roundtables with journalists. They weren't flashy, but there was a massive amount of information that you gained. Those are all gone. They don't have those anymore. So as Ryan was talking about, the digital space answers the questions, what now, what if, and where can we do this? And this is our deep dive. An indelicate way would say this is kind of our nerd dive on these topics, because they're some of the greatest journalists, and one of them right here on the screen that does great work in 2 minutes each night on these topics, but sometimes they deserve much deeper dive into what's going on. And I think maybe the last 10 minutes with Tamya, Augusta, we've raised more questions than we could possibly answer, and more people to bring to the table to talk about these questions, especially dealing with this particular new jail, which I think she acknowledged tonight this is probably going to happen.
Yeah.
District attorney goes along with the ARPA funds. And there's another example of, I think the media narrative, there's going to be one. There's a huge bottleneck that could happen if David Prater doesn't believe those funds are appropriate for this. Anyway, it's another legal discussion for another time. Yes. But nonetheless, it's a lot of fun, and it's really great to have you on board.
Thank you, Scott. And I'm just so pleased to be welcomed onto your shows. And, benefit from the platform that you've built through years of great work in this community. So I'm just very grateful to be here.
Thank you so much. Quick reminder, we'll have this program. We have no thoughts at this point of ceasing through the holidays. I'm not sure about your Tuesday program. I can tell you Monday night is going to be our last Health Watch Oklahoma for the year. I will tell you why. The doctors are give plum out. That's the saying from Garvin County. They are give out. Dr. Bookman, Dr. Sublett, Dr. Armitage, and Dr. Chansholm have been at this for 20-something months now, and they're going to take time off during the holidays, so there will be no Health Watch Oklahoma after Monday night. I think that may be a fun show, so that will be 7 o'clock Monday night, and then it's sayonara until after the first of the year until we get back together with those guys. And it's just as Omicron is flaring up, but we'll have that information on Wednesday nights, updates if we need them. So for Augusta McDonnell, I'm Scott Mitchell saying thanks for being with us tonight. Have a pleasant tomorrow, and we'll see you next week.
We'll see you next week.
All right. Good night, everyone.
Good night.